For those I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Pete Peterson, and I'm the very grateful Dean of Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy, and I bring you greetings from Malibu, California, a city so far different than the one that we're in this evening, I can't even begin to tell you. But it is such a great pleasure to be one of the partners for this two-day conference. As Dr. George has said, he serves as our Reagan Honorary Visiting Professor. But as we'll get into a little bit in my welcoming remarks tomorrow morning, there really are so many overlaps in the relationships and friendships here, including the one tonight with Rabbi Dr. Meir Soloveichik. So just a real pleasure and honor to be with all of you. Above my office, above the desk in my office in Malibu, I don't know if I said that's where Pepperdine is, where I return to tomorrow. There's actually a pretty famous LA Times photograph of Father Michael, who is standing on the front steps of the Santa Barbara mission. I don't know, has anybody ever been to the Santa Barbara mission? In 1925, there was a massive earthquake. And what makes this photograph so important to me, but also I think important for the work that we're doing here today, is the picture is of Father Michael on the front steps of the mission after the earthquake with rubble surrounding all around him, just pieces of the mission that have just have fallen apart. Obviously, everything has been rebuilt. But the face on Father Michael as he's looking out into the distance, really kind of setting his face like a flint against the challenges that he knows are coming to rebuild this great mission, which obviously, again, has happened, is an encouragement to me in responding to the work that we all have before us, the work that was outlined on the panels today and in the conversation with Robbie, the challenges that he has set forth in making men moral, not only when it was written 30 years ago, but also today. I've spoken with more than a couple people that have said we kind of landed on that last panel in a very challenging note, given what we're seeing in the culture today. But to me, it's really going to be through friendships like the ones that may even be established here tonight that we are going to respond to this moment, that we are responding to this moment. Yes, maybe with a culture that has fallen down all around us, but one that understands where we get our strength from and where we get our sustenance from through friendships. And so without further ado, I'd like to call up Father Henry to give benediction for tonight's meal. Thank you.
Let us pray. Lord of heaven and earth, you have placed the stars in their firmaments, and you see into the depths of our hearts. You have made man after your own image, forming him to know and to love, patterned after your own divine goodness. Grant that in all of our conversation and discussions over this conference, we may be animated by your Holy Spirit, that we may walk the paths of your wisdom, and that we may receive with gratitude all the good things that you have poured out from our elders and from those who have come before us. Give us the grace to acknowledge that you are the font of all good, the source of all law, the destination of all human beings made in your image. Give us the grace to say thank you with all of our hearts for the many blessings you have bestowed upon us, and bless the food and drink we're about to enjoy. We ask this through your holy and saving name. Amen.
I'm Yuval Levin of the American Enterprise Institute, and I am just here to introduce the great Rabbi Dr. Meir Soloveichik. I asked him what I should say about him, and he said, make sure you say Rabbi Doctor and tell them about my humility. And so I've now done both of those things. I do want to start just very briefly with a word about making men moral. And first of all, by just thanking you all for being here and being together and making what is really a fantastic reunion in different ways for all of us. A reunion of Robbie's friends is always a reunion of friends, and it's really just spectacular. The conversations today were wonderful, and we're just so happy to be able to bring people together like this. My gratitude also to Joel, who really did all the work. And, if teaching law doesn't work out, you have a future in wedding planning, because the attention to detail really is pretty amazing. And, of course, to Pete and to Ryan. Making Men Moral, as we all know, came out in 1993. I got to encounter the book a few years after that as a graduate student at the University of Chicago, and in a way that relates to our choice of speaker tonight in a sense. I was a research assistant to Leon Kass, who was working then on a book about Genesis, and we got to talking and working on one of his chapters about law and morals, as one does when thinking about Genesis. And Leon said to me, one way of thinking we really have to consider is here. And he pulled out from the shelf behind him a worn and folded up and underlined and written on copy of Making Men Moral. And he paid the book the highest compliment he can pay a book. If you know Leon, he gives books away. That's what he does. He handed the book to me, and before he let it go, he said, "Just make sure you get this back to me." That really tells you, Robbie, that is an important book to him. And it's not shocking that in thinking about a Jewish question in a Jewish way, Leon found a lot to learn from Robbie. And that does point us, in a sense, to our speaker tonight, one of Robbie's great students, Meir Soloveichik. It's hard to know where to start in introducing Meir. I could tell you that he's the funniest rabbi that I know, but that might seem like a low bar. It's not, but it might. What I would really tell you is that Meir plays a role now that almost doesn't exist, of an absolutely essential role in a free society, of a voice of faith and religious truth who speaks into our public debates. He plays the kind of role that the great Rabbi Jonathan Sacks played until his passing last year. He plays the kind of role that C.S. Lewis played, in a way, of constantly reminding our society in a loving way, in a friendly way, but in a clear voice of the truths that have to be at the core of our life if we are to have a thriving national life. And to my mind, really, no one in my generation comes close to doing that in as vital and valuable a way as Meir Soloveichik. I could also tell you, and this is to set a very high bar, that Meir is one of Robbie's greatest students, and we all here know that is a very high bar. So having set it that high, I leave it to Meir to clear the bar. Meir Soloveichik.
Thank you, Yuval, for your incredibly gracious words and for noting my humility, which is very special to me. A couple words about my rugged good looks would not have gone amiss. It really is a joy to be here with you and an honor to be introduced by one of the wisest thinkers about the nature of America, its past and its future, and one of the most gifted teachers that I know, having seen you and having had the privilege of having you teach my students. And we look forward to having that privilege again. I want to thank AEI, though I'm relieved that we were able to get out of the slum that is your building to be here in the Cosmo Club. Thank goodness. And I want to thank my wonderful friend, Pete Peterson, who talks a good game about the beauty of Malibu, California. But for him, it's always refreshing because Pete grew up in New Jersey, maybe the least attractive place on the planet. And I've just learned that Yuval is also from New Jersey. Is that correct, Yuval? Is that yes? It's as is often said in New York. If you want to know why we in New York are depressed, it's because for us the light at the end of the tunnel is New Jersey. Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody. As always, as soon as I received an email from Robbie with an invitation, I knew I would accept, because I always do what Robbie asked me to do, no matter what. But I was even more excited to hear that I would be invited to give a tribute to him. The way Robbie pitched it, he said that there'd be 2 keynotes, and Thursday night you'll speak, and then Justice Alito would speak Friday night. So I excitedly told my wife, keynotes, me, then Justice Alito. So she said, "Oh, do you think Justice Alito will be at your speech?" And I said, "I don't think so, but probably Justice Alito's wife is asking him, do you think Sally will be at your speech?" And I can't, because it's on Friday night. Thanks for scheduling it. Anti-Semitism wins again. And now for my remarks about my beloved and revered teacher, whom I owe more than I can say. Several years ago, the media announced an astonishing historical discovery: the recovery of the original tablets of the 10 Commandments. I refer, of course, to the 2 tablets that were utilized by Cecil B. DeMille in the filming of his epic movie, The 10 Commandments. You see, DeMille, for the making of this film, had actually directed that 2 tablets be carved from the very site in the Sinai Desert believed to be Mount Sinai by many today. They carved 2 tablets out of the mountain to utilize in the film. And then after the movie was finished, he gifted these tablets to Mount Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. The tablets were actually attached to the outside wall of the hospital for all to see, so that the tablets with the 10 Commandments were literally on Mount Sinai. Then Mount Sinai merged with another institution. I think there was an earthquake in California. Great state you have there, Pete. And, by the time they moved, putting up the 10 Commandments in public squares or in well-known locations was no longer fashionable. And so they were put into storage and lost for decades. Then in 2003, when the curator of Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles was tasked with engaging in categorization of the vast modern art collection of Cedars-Sinai Hospital, he suddenly came upon in storage 2 large stone tablets, or as he told the newspaper, I pulled them down, I said, "What is this? What is this?" They were the tablets. So I read about this with great interest, because I'm greatly interested in the 10 Commandments. The movie, The actual 10 Commandments are good too. And then sometime later, I received a call from the rabbinic chaplain at Cedars-Sinai, inviting me to come speak as a scholar in residence in the hospital. So I thought about it. I didn't really want to schlep to Los Angeles. Then I said, wait a minute, aren't you guys the ones that discovered the tablets of the 10 Commandments? And he said, yeah. And if you agree to come speak, you can hold them. I mean, how do you turn that down? So I went, and there in Los Angeles, I got to hold the tablets of the 10 Commandments. A major, major moment for me. And then they were put back into storage, I can only assume. Now, that experience has forever inspired me to ponder with renewed perspective the actual original tablets of the law, and how different they were from the usual way that Jewish law is recorded. Whereas the Torah is traditionally written in ink on parchment, that's the Sefer Torah, the scroll of the law, The original 10 Commandments, as you know, were etched into stone. The Hebrew word is charut. Charut means carved by God into the stone. And this difference between the Torah scroll and the tablets were noted by Rabbi's very dear and very much missed friend, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Rabbi Sacks wrote, "Consider two forms of writing in ancient times. One is to use ink on parchment. Another is to engrave words in stone. There is," he wrote, "a marked difference between these two methods. The ink and parchment in a scroll are two different materials. The ink is external to the parchment. It is superimposed upon it, and it does not become part of the parchment. It remains distinct, and so it can be rubbed off and removed. But in engraving," Rabbi Sacks wrote, "does not use some new substance. It is carved out of the stone itself. It becomes a part of it." Now consider, Rabbi Sacks further wrote, these two ways of writing as metaphors for law. There is a law that is externally imposed. People keep it because they fear that if they do not, they will be caught and punished. But, Rabbi Sacks added, there can be a different kind of society in which people keep the law not because they fear they will be caught and punished, but because they know the law. They have studied it. They understand it. They have internalized it. It has become a part of who they are. The law of the two tablets, in other words, this is Rabbi Sacks' point, I think. The law of the two tablets seeks to create a society in which the virtues and vision that the laws express are ultimately etched into the human character. This, for Rabbi Sacks, is the carved law, charut, that's the Hebrew word. And it is the link for the rabbis, as he notes, between that word charut, for the carved law, and the Hebrew word for freedom, cherut, because the well-being of a free society depends on its laws allowing and encouraging and setting the stage for the flourishing of virtue. This, it seems, is an apt insight with which to ponder the extraordinary achievements of my teacher, the man whose work we study and celebrate this week. Rabbi is for me, as I always say, my Rebbe, which in yeshiva refers to those that teach us Torah. It means our teacher and master in the law. And of course, Rabbi is for so many of us a Rebbe and has taught us all about law. He has taught us what sort of ideas we ought to see and seek embodied in our country's laws, and thereby what virtues we hope to be ultimately etched into the hearts of our fellow citizens as members of our free society. It's with this in mind that I would like to offer tonight a Jewish appreciation of Rabbi's intellectual legacy, from making men moral until today. A perspective that I offer that is linked to the tradition presented to the world through Sinai, expressing hopefully thereby why we are so blessed to celebrate Rabbi this evening. It was in his Gifford lectures, later published under the title Three Rival Versions of Moral Inquiry, that Alistair MacIntyre, building on his previous work, described philosophy as a techne, a craft, a way of thinking, one which one must learn from those that have come before. And he then introduces the following question. He asks, what happens when the aspiring philosophical apprentice is confronted with two distinct traditions, philosophical ways of thinking, each with its own authorities, its own unique approach to the craft in question, which is the search for man's ultimate good? It was this question, MacIntyre writes, that Thomas Aquinas faced as he sought to learn from both the Christian, biblically inspired Augustinian tradition and the Greek Aristotelian tradition. Or as MacIntyre puts it, philosophy of one kind thus encountered philosophy of quite another, each with its own standards for evaluating the truth and rationality of philosophical claims. Aquinas, MacIntyre argues, succeeded in merging the two. In fact, for MacIntyre argues in this book that Aquinas became the first philosopher in history to truly unite two traditions, to truly, as he put it, unite, quote, two hitherto independent traditions of thought, merging them into one in such a way as to provide a direction for still further development of a new unified tradition. That's MacIntyre. Now, personally, I wouldn't say Aquinas was the first to do this. There's somebody whose name rhymes with Roses, Rhymonides, who did a pretty good job at that. And MacIntyre noted this in earlier works and After Virtue as well. But now is not the time, ladies and gentlemen, for my own Jewish airing of grievances. I was only slotted a half an hour, and we require much longer for that. The truth is that the question of the reconcilability of Greek and biblical tradition has dominated theological and philosophical debates throughout the medieval and modern era, and even divided people and great thinkers that were very close to one another. There's a wonderful transcript from Robbie's friends and Yuval's teachers, which he referenced, Leon Kass and the late Amy Kass, who were once jointly interviewed at Valparaiso University, whose school song describes itself as "Here on one fair campus, Athens and Jerusalem." And Leon was asked the following. He was asked, "You have in your writing sharply contrasted the wisdom of Athens and Jerusalem. Are they finally antithetical? Was Tertullian right that Athens and Jerusalem have nothing to say to one another? Or are they in some deep sense compatible?" Leon replied, "I think they are ultimately not compatible, if you rightly distinguish the 2 points of departure. Wonder seeking its replacement by knowledge, which makes the perplexities go away on the side of Athens, versus on the side of Jerusalem, the fear or reverence of the Lord, which is only the beginning of wisdom, but which is never superseded by a kind of full understanding." That's what Leon says. And to this, his wife Amy sharply replies that, of course, the two traditions can be fused and merged. And she says to Leon, "Why would you say that the two are not compatible? Why not say that one leads to or supplements the other, especially given the way you formulate the differences? I have objections to the way you formulate the difference, but why wouldn't you use the language of supplementation?" So they disagreed. It's just your usual argument between husband and wife about, who amongst us has not gotten into a disagreement with our spouse about the reconcilability of the Greek and Jewish traditions? The moment my wife brings that up, I'm like, danger, Will Robinson, danger. Now, I have to say that I am myself at times somewhat sympathetic to Leon's more skeptical attitude, but one can think of worse intellectual groups to be in than one comprising Maimonides, Aquinas, and Amy Kass, a group that, by the way, would make for an amazing dinner party. Robbie is ultimately an American Aquinas. He fuses traditions Hellenistic and Hebraic, Greek and Jewish, in his eloquent articulation of the American idea. Let me further describe how I think this is so. Robbie has spoken movingly about his encounter with how his encounter with Greek philosophy changed his life. He put it in one interview this way. He said, "The idea is that the basic understandings of morality are available to us as rationally capable creatures, as people capable and creatures capable of inquiry, understanding, and judgment. And we come to know it, and this is Aristotle's great insight, really, by reflecting on what is intrinsically fulfilling of human beings as rational animals." And Robbie said that as a student, he says, "I was impressed by that school of thought, so I began working on that, studying Aristotle, studying Aquinas, and ultimately, as describes, coming to see how that actually impacted Enlightenment thinkers and the development of the American idea." So from Aristotle, Robbie encountered the notion that human beings have a moral teleology accessible to reason, and that indeed reasoning about it well, is an essential part of the moral life. Or as MacIntyre pithily put it, while for philosophers such as Kant, one can be both good and stupid, for Aristotle, stupidity of a certain kind precludes goodness. This is Aristotle. Meanwhile, as you all know, from Robbie's earliest interaction with Greek thought, a seminar on Plato's Gorgias, he encountered the merits of argument and its importance freely engaged in seeking and finding the truth. Or as he put it, you can't get to the truth of the matter without considering the best that can be said on the competing sides of the question. All this has profoundly impacted Robbie's understanding of the human being placed at the essence of the American idea, as well as his steadfast commitment to free speech in the academy and in the public square. But to see only this aspect of Robbie, the Greek side, is to miss part of the picture. And in preparing for this talk, I went back and watched the video that was created when Robbie was honored at Notre Dame with the Evangelium Vitae Medal. Maybe some of you were probably there. So Notre Dame had sent around videographers around the country to interview Robbie's friends, colleagues, and students about his many virtues. And given who Robbie is, it was an eclectic It was an eclectic group. I was one of those interviewed, but as you know, a Sharif was on the video. And as you know, it's a natural inclination after the video is released. Do you want to see the other interviews? Because, you want to see if anyone was better than you in the video. If anyone said something more pithy than what you thought of. So my opening quote in the video about Robbie was, Bluegrass, West Virginia, Catholic natural law tradition, philosophy of law, Plato's Gorgias. That's all Robbie. That was my quote. And then there was a quote from presidential candidate Cornel West, which went as follows. He said, every time Robbie talks, he reminds me a little bit of Malcolm X. And I thought, I should have gone with that. He reminds me of Malcolm X. That has Meir Soloveichik written all over it. But the truth is, first time anybody said that, Robbie, right? Okay. But the truth is, what I failed to say in my own opening quote is that Robbie is not just Plato's Gorgias, but the Hebrew Bible. That's an essential part of Robbie. I remember being told how once at Princeton, Robbie was going to have lunch with a campus rabbi whose approach to tradition was, shall we say, not that traditional. And Robbie said something like, he said, I'm going to have lunch with Rabbi so-and-so. And then he added, I'm going to teach him a thing or two about the Torah. Robbie reveres the Torah, the Jewish contribution to the world. He has shown this, and this is especially important now, in his love for the Jewish people and in his constant and courageous denunciation of the evil of anti-Semitism, wherever it rears its head, in the academy or in the Christian world. But Robbie has shown his love for the Jewish people above all in his recognition of how essential the Hebraic tradition is to civilization. For as Robbie reminds us in Making Men Moral, as important as Aristotle is for our understanding of human nature and the polis, there is one massive lacuna in his writings, which is to say that Aristotle lacks entirely and utterly the notion of the equality of the human being. And indeed, Aristotle argues that law is meant to reflect this human inequality. Aristotle, this is what Robbie writes, quote, wrongly supposed that people have preordained stations in life, and that the wise legislator who is concerned to promote virtue will therefore have the job of slotting people into their proper stations and seeing to it that each person fulfills the duties of his particular station. Aristotle, Robbie adds, failed to perceive that persons as loci of human goods and of rational capacity for self-determination by free choices are equal in dignity, however unequal they are in ability, intelligence, and other gifts. Meaning, as magnificent a moral as the moral image created by Aristotle of the human being in the Nicomachean Ethics may be, as profound as his politics may be, there is one essential notion that is missing, and the origin of this intellectual notion is not Greek but Jewish. And here I quote Robbie again, who said, the great truth of natural law, which is at the heart of our civilizational and civic order, has its theological expression in the biblical teaching that man, unlike the brute animals, is made in the image and likeness of the divine creator and ruler of the universe. And here, of course, Robbie is utterly in agreement with Leon Kass, who, asked to reflect on the differences in teaching both Greek classics and the Bible, said, quote, you don't get out of Plato and Aristotle an account that would sustain the view of the equal dignity of every human being. You would not get the foundation for liberal democracy out of that. It really rests, Leon added, on the sense that first stated both man and woman equally made in God's image. And here Leon is echoing one of our greatest Americans, John Quincy Adams, who, while very busily serving in St. Petersburg as the American ambassador to the court of the Tsar, decided to write to his son, George Washington Adams, letters about the Bible. And John Quincy Adams wrote as follows. He wrote, you don't get out of Plato, and he wrote as he added, he said, this is John Quincy Adams, almost all the Greek philosophers reasoned and meditated upon the nature of the gods, but scarcely any of them ever reflected enough even to imagine that there was but one God, and not one of them ever conceived of him as the creator of the world. But the first words of the Bible are, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. This blessed and sublime idea of God, wrote Quincy Adams, the creator of the universe, the source of all human virtue and all human happiness, for which the sages and philosophers of Greece and Rome groped in darkness and never found. John Quincy Adams. The absolute inviolable equality of every human being created in the image of God. This moral principle, utterly absent in Aristotle but emphasized at the very beginning of the Bible, lies at the heart of the political vision written in Making Men Moral and all that has followed from Robbie in the last 30 years. To read Robbie is to ponder where civilization would have been if we had never had this doctrine, this idea, had civilization had only Athens, only Aristotle, and not the biblical vision of the human person. Jews, of course, are asked to ponder this right now at this time of year as we mark the holiday of Hanukkah, remembering how the Maccabees, in their heroic stand against the Hellenistic Empire that sought to stamp out the last vestige of Hebraism, preserved this concept. We kindle a menorah remembering a temple flame that burned longer than it ought have, and the marking of the miracle is meant as metaphor, a reminder of how one profound truth in the midst of moral darkness can change the world, and how much darker the world would have been without the Hebraic tradition. It's this, of course, that lies at the heart of Robbie's moral vision and at the core of his articulation of the American political vision. For he has articulated to all of us how inviolable equality lies not only at the heart of Jefferson's Declaration, but also at the heart of the Constitution, as understood by the man with whom so much of Robbie's career has been bound up, Madison. You know, my wife and I, when we're not arguing about the reconcilability of the Bible and Aristotle, have made it a rule to take our children across the country to sites of American significance. We've gone to Valley Forge, Ticonderoga, Antietam. But of all of our visits, 2 sites made the greatest impression. The first was utterly predictable. It was Gettysburg. Of course, the ultimate embodiment of the advancement of American equality. I actually took my son on a Segway tour of Gettysburg and was so mesmerized by my surroundings that I ran into a tree branch and fell off my Segway and skinned my entire arm. So you might say I was injured at Gettysburg. The world will little forget what I said there, but it can never forget what I did there. But then we went with our family to Madison's home, to Montpelier, which I was not expecting to be that interesting. And we went into Madison's library. And the tour guide, the regular guy who was just his job is to give the regular tour, said something that I thought was incredible. He described how we are standing here where Madison designed and defended the constitutional system. And then he says, this site is for government like what the patent office where Einstein wrote his papers was for physics. It was here that the American constitutional vision was born. I thought that was incredible. I was struck by it. And Robbie, in advancing the legacy of Madison, has reminded us that this vision of government, one in which the individual is not to be merely assimilated into the collective, in which government must be checked by its very structure from extreme intrusion into our lives, that is founded on a vision of the absolute value of the human being. Thus, the Constitution is not a pragmatic, but a profoundly moral document, one which has equality of the human being at its very heart. Robbie said this in one of his most important expressions of the implications of making men moral, which is his 2007 Erasmus lecture, where he said as follows: "We see how profound is the mistake of supposing that the principle of limited government is rooted in the denial of moral truth or a putative requirement of governments to refrain from acting on the basis of judgments of moral truth. For our commitment to limited government is itself the fruit of moral conviction, conviction ultimately founded on truths that our nation's founders proclaimed as self-evident, that all men are created equal." This means for Robbie that the checks and balances inherent in the Constitution, the Madisonian protections against the tyranny of the majority, are founded on a moral vision of the equality of the human person. And this is why, as Robbie puts it, in future debates about our polity, he writes, we must not adopt a merely pragmatic understanding or speak only of practical considerations in addressing the pressing issues of our day. Sound positions cannot be effectively advanced and defended by citizens and statesmen who are unwilling or unable to engage in moral argument. End quote. Above all, for Robbie, as we know, this means seeking a recognition in law of the inviolable preciousness and equality of the human being, of every human being, and seeking to create a society that recognizes and celebrates and protects and allows for the flourishing of the human family. Yet, we look out at the West, or even just at the English-speaking world, and we see many daunting challenges to this vision. We see a Canada where suicide is urged on invalids. We see in England where an 8-month-old baby is forcibly taken off life support, even when the parents are offered care for their baby in another country. We see in Ireland where a long-cherished defense of the unborn is discarded, and where free speech is being on the brink of being done away with in the name of postmodern Ireland's own version of making men moral. We see in America where the biblical vision of the family, described in the very creation of man and woman in the image of God, is itself disregarded by so many. There are, of course, some important advances to celebrate, and I am honored in a certain sense to serve as the opening act for Justice Alito, who will be speaking in this slot tomorrow evening, though I can guarantee all of you that my jokes are way better. Thank you. But it is hard to avoid the impression that the way in which the tablets of God's law were once proudly displayed on Mount Sinai Hospital and then consigned into storage and lost, it is hard not to see that as a metaphor for our times. But in returning to the story of Sinai, we find a source of hope and inspiration, one of which actually Cecil B. DeMille helps to remind us. When I went to hold those tablets, I was shown a picture of when they were first installed. And Cecil B. DeMille comes to present it to Mount Sinai Hospital. They actually showed me separately that apparently one of the Jewish donors to Mount Sinai Hospital had decided that he also wanted an exact replica of Michelangelo's Moses made, from Rome. Of course, he didn't know that Michelangelo's Moses has horns. So he just, ordered, get me a replica of Michelangelo's Moses. And so they bring down they showed this to me. It's still there on a corner in Los Angeles. And they brought it over and take it out of the box, out of the crate. Behold, it's a Jew with horns. And so the person who ordered it, the board member, was very upset. And so he ordered the horns, I guess, sanded off. Just goes to show you, in Los Angeles, even the statues get plastic surgery. Okay. But what I was shown was a picture of when they were first affixed in a ceremony that was attended by the then governor of California, Ronald Reagan, and the affixing of a plaque next to the tablets on the wall. And I saw the plaque as well, still there next to the tablets. And the plaque read as follows: "These tablets come from the heights of Mount Sinai itself, from the hallowed ground where Moses stood when God revealed himself in the burning bush. The God of Sinai, the God of the carved tablets of the law, revealed himself as a sign of hope in a burning bush featuring a miraculous flame. The bush burned, but it was not consumed. I must go see this sight," said Moses. "How is it possible? In other words, that this flame does not go out." It was my grandfather, Rabbi Meir Soloveichik, who adopted this story for a homiletical teaching. The fire of Sinai, the light of truth, does not go out. And this fire, he notes, burns but does not consume. It does not destroy. It is not destructive. Fire usually, he said, has three qualities. It gives light, it gives warmth, but it also has terrible destructive properties. But the light of truth, the fire of Sinai, only has the first two. It warms and it brightens. It enlightens, but it does not destroy. It gives warmth and it gives light. It draws the human soul to it. and enlightens with its radiance. This is the light of truth. This is the flame that appears at a hopeless time as a beacon of hope. So my grandfather said, ladies and gentlemen, a fire that warms and enlightens but does not consume. Is there a better biblical metaphor for what Robbie George has been to so many? A light which does not consume, which radiates not anger but warmth and love, which reflects the light of moral truth. And so as I prepare to mark in a dark and difficult time for the Jewish people, the Festival of Lights, I express my gratitude to God for my Rebbe and teacher-in-law, the great friend of the Jewish people, and the American Aquinas, who has been such a source of light for so many of us. When I watched the video of individuals interviewed about Robbie, made by Notre Dame, in the end I found that the person who best captured Robbie was Robbie. And he said at the end of the video, all we've got to do is speak the truth out loud, have the courage to speak the truth out loud, and its own luminosity, its own splendor, will draw people to it. This, he added, is a great encouragement. I draw hope from this. It is indeed a great encouragement, so long as it is someone like Robbie who proclaims this truth, reflecting a radiance that illumines and warms, not unlike a flame in a desert, spear and sear, that proclaimed hope in the darkness so many millennia ago. Long may Robbie continue to illumine our lives, and may we be enlightened and warmed by his wisdom for many years to come. Thank you very much.